So, thanks for being here. My name is Jay, and I'm excited about this. So, we're going to get right into it. Today's conversation is going to be on customer discovery. Who here has heard of customer discovery? Who's heard of customer development? Same number. Wonderful. Who here classifies as an entrepreneur? Who here works at a startup? Okay, great. Okay, got a good feel for the room. So I'm going to try to convince you today that user research is the absolute key to your success and how you can do that in a very practical, tactical way. My name is Jay. I'm the founder of Unreal Collective. I work with founders and freelancers to help grow their businesses. Our flagship product is a 12-week online accelerator. I also am an author for LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn bought lynda.com about 3 years ago, and I'm an author in the product category. What you're about to see here today is actually my LinkedIn course in about an hour in PowerPoint format, to be honest. And I launched a podcast last week called Upside. It's a podcast about startups outside of Silicon Valley. Previously to that, I was the COO of a company called Tixers. Tixers was a digital ticketing marketplace. We were a little bit like StubHub on the front end. If you were buying tickets, we had a little bit of a different value proposition for ticket holders, season ticket holders. This was my trial by fire learning about product. It was a two-person team. We had contract engineers. I learned everything I knew about product through just having next to no money and contract engineers who needed a lot of very specific direction. Luckily for us, that was acquired in 2015. We worked for 1UP Sports for a year, and then we moved on. I went to Crosschecks about 2 years ago, and that was a lot more of a formal education into product at a modern software organization. They had a lot more processes in place. They had on-staff engineers, which is amazing. They had incredible UX designers, and that was really where I formalized a lot of this knowledge that I've continued to really put form to and has taught me everything about customer development. Who here has been to a startup weekend? A couple of you. Startup weekend is 3 days, about a weekend, 54 hours to conceptualize, validate, and start a startup company. My first startup weekend was in 2012. This was kind of my formative basis of entrepreneurship before Tixers. This was me. I had actually less hair then than I do now. I don't know how that works, but I'm pretty stoked about it. We built an app called ManCard. It was kind of like Instagram. When Instagram was taken off, it had a very similar feed. But the whole point of ManCard was to share photos of your friends or yourself doing manly or unmanly things, and that contributed to your ManCard score, which is right there. It was a lot of fun. I think we placed second place in that event. We got into TechCrunch, which is really cool, but the TLDR on that is we gave up. But what that did allow me to do is start organizing Startup Weekend, which I've been doing for about 5 or 6 years, which is a lot of fun. And through that, I have seen 5 years, hundreds and hundreds of ideas die. In the graveyard, no longer exists. That's kind of what happens when you see dozens of events a year, dozens of ideas a year just spring up and then go down. So to me, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's not about ideas, it's about execution. It's about really solving a problem that people want solved. And that's what I've learned. I've learned to build something people actually want and people actually need. A lot of times that's actually an important difference. A lot of times you do want to really know your customers so well that you're creating something they need even before they know that they want it. This is something that Y Combinator has made very famous. This phrase, make something people want, is sort of their mantra. They were one of the first startup accelerators ever. And it's really informed people like Airbnb and Stripe and Dropbox. That's taught them to build software products that people actually want. Because if you don't, your business will die. It will not exist. You will not sell anything. You'll waste a ton of time. You'll waste a lot of money, even just an opportunity cost of you wasting your time. This is a graph from CB Insights of the top 20 reasons startups fail. And the number one reason, no market need. That's bonkers to me, that you're starting a company that has no market need, and now almost at a 50% clip they're failing. 42% of startups are not solving a need. And outside of that, you see a couple other categories here: ran out of cash, user-unfriendly product, ignoring customers here in the top. I don't know how many I have here, like 8 reasons. And all of those things can be avoided through customer development. And so how do you build something people want? You talk to your users. And what you need to know is you are not your user. You could be a user, maybe you are building something that's scratching your own itch, but if you're trying to sell it to more people, you're going to have to talk to more people than yourself. If you're solving something for yourself and you only care about solving it for yourself, fine, you are your user and you can stay in an echo chamber, but don't expect to sell anything. So talk to your users and remember that you are not your only user, we'll even say. You need customer development. Customer development is something that was made famous through the lean startup. And this is something that I have, through LinkedIn, created. And this is going to be actually just a faster version of it. So enjoy. Customer development is 4 steps: customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and company building. Customer discovery is going out and making sure that you've actually turned this vision into a series of hypotheses and tested them to see that you understand your target market. Customer validation moves into, okay, once we understand our market and we understand they have a need or a problem, can we actually get them to give us real money for the solution? Customer creation is saying, okay, we know people will pay real money for the real solution. How do we pour gasoline on that fire and start to pour more customers into the pipeline? And company building is when you've gotten those processes down, you start to niche out different parts of your company so that sales and marketing may not be the same person. Sales and the COO may become different people. Business development may be its own division. It's when you really formalize the structure of your company and build it out to capture on all the customer demand for this product that you validated. So today we're going to talk about customer discovery predominantly. Customer discovery answers these questions of what is your hypothesis, who are your target users, what makes them unique, what can you learn about them, who is a top priority for your users. You may think, I've got several different user groups. Well, let's talk about who those user groups are and prioritize them and say which ones are the ones we really care about most. I recommend writing problem hypotheses before you talk to these users and doing it in the form of a user story. And that's important because a lot of this is going to come from the role of a product manager. Even if your title is not a product manager, if you're an entrepreneur or you're building a project or business, you are essentially a product manager. And user stories become really important when you're working with a cross-functional team to help them understand what needs to be built. So in these problem hypotheses, there are 3 important parts that you fill in. As a user type, I want to some sort of behavior so that I can have some sort of outcome or benefit. And the first thing you're doing is making assumptions here. And you're especially making an assumption on the I want to. At the early stage of customer discovery, you don't really know what your product is going to look like. You're really focused on finding the need. And so you're trying first to figure out, as a user type, I want to what? What is the thing that I need to do? This is becoming, this is a secondary hypothesis essentially, but it's not bad to start with some assumptions. So let me give you some example of these hypotheses. The first one is Nest, the smart home thermostat that Google bought and probably wasn't a great investment. As a homeowner, I want to use a smart thermostat so that I can save time and money. Obviously, smart thermostat became their product. They figured out that was what I want to do. But what they found out first was that homeowners want to save time and money. That was the outcome. That was the need they were trying to do. How can we help homeowners save time and money? We're going to give them a smart thermostat. Here's another example. This is an example I would assume would be like Salesforce, the software as a service company that's massive and services mostly sales divisions within organizations. As a sales professional, I want to manage all my contacts and leads in one place so that I can close more deals. Sales professionals want to close more deals. How can they do that? We'll give them a product that manages all their contacts and leads in one place. As an office manager, I want my patients to sign in electronically to save time and reduce errors. This was something that we researched from my time at Crosschecks, talking to independent practices. We found office managers were a user for us. They were trying to save time in the check-in process and reduce errors in the check-in process. So we said, how do we deliver a product that lets them sign patients in electronically? So when you're going down the route of figuring out who are my users, what is the outcome that they want, I recommend starting with secondary research. You're probably going to want to not spend money when you start figuring this stuff out, right? Would you guys rather spend money or not spend money when you're starting a project or business? I would like to not spend money. And money, resources, time, all this is interconnected, and these are things that you want to cut down on. Secondary research comes from places like Ohio State, places like the Pew Research Center, places like Consumer Reports. There are people that are out there probably already talking to your assumed users and doing a lot of research already in this space. What can you learn from them before you start doing your primary research? This is not at all a replacement for primary research, but this can give you an early indication if you're onto something or not. You may figure out, oh, I'm really thinking about this the wrong way, or oh, this is really fleshed out as something that is a real problem, and I'm seeing that from this research. If you have either of those moments, go right into primary research. Well, first of all, sorry. If you have the moment of, oh, this is really something that needs to be done, go into primary research. If you see, oh, this is really not a problem, this is not something that this real user feels, then it saves you some time of spending money and effort going into all of that. So these are different places to do secondary research. Google has a lot of this. Google Scholar specifically. There's a ton of university research out there that a ton of time and resources go into, and it gets published, and it's available for you to look at. I also love reaching out to experts directly, people who are fascinated by the same problem that you are, maybe at an academic level or at just an anecdotal level. Talk to them and say, hey, you've already talked to these users a lot. Am I off base? Have you heard this? What are you thinking? And they'll really help you start to shortcut some of your learning. All right, now what? You've done secondary research. You've said, okay, this seems to be a problem. All the indications that I'm seeing from secondary research and consumer reports and talking to experts, it's saying I'm onto something. So now what do? This is when you move on to primary research. Primary research is talking directly to the user, talking directly to the person that you think you're solving a problem for. And there are two main methods of doing this: surveys and customer interviews. Both are pretty popular. Surveys are especially popular, and I'll talk about them, but I don't really want to, because in the phase of starting something in customer discovery, you need to be doing as much of an information grab as possible, and surveys are a tool that are only as good as you make them. And creating surveys is so often done poorly that the data you get back is garbage and not good basis for you to go out and then actually try to, start a company. I see this all the time with things like Startup Weekend. You say, hey, would you pay $20 for this? Yes or no? And you send it to your friends and you send it to your mom and they check yes, and you're like, hey, 75% of people want to please me. But until you're asking people to vote with their money and vote with their time, that doesn't really mean anything. You're asking a very leading, biased question, probably to somebody that's not even your market. So I'll talk about surveys and how to do them properly, but at the early stage, you really want to have conversations with all the individuals that you think could be your potential users. Surveys are good for tracking changes over time. And that comes in when you usually have at least a minimally viable product or something you can show as wireframes, because you don't have changes over time to track until you've kind of built something. So again, this is why I don't focus on surveys at the outset of customer discovery. Quantifying issues seen in user studies. Really good for surveys, because surveys put a lot of numbers to your data. That's a really good use case for surveys. But again, you won't really get that data or those numbers until you can put an actual product in front of somebody, and you shouldn't have a product to put in front of somebody until you've validated that this is a problem they're having, and that's going to come from interviews. It's good for measuring attitudes, intent, and task success, but you see where I'm going here. Interviews are really good for understanding underlying motivations and needs. Really good for getting a lot of data quickly from these individuals about how do you spend your day-to-day? Why are you thinking about things this way? What do you wish was different about the way you're doing things? What annoys you? What are things that you just hate about your job? They're good for discovering whether people are successful using a product. It'd be hard to put a product in front of somebody and say, okay, now take the survey and tell me how well you did. That's going to depend on honesty and awareness on their part, whereas if you watch them do it and then you talk to them about it, you're going to get a lot more valid information from them first. It's also good for uncovering actual behavior. When you can watch somebody and talk to somebody and ladder into questions and not give them this kind of wall of a screen of a survey where they think and they're trying to fill in something that makes them seem smart or non-biased, interviews are really good at helping you uncover the truth. A little bit more about surveys before I dig into interviews deeper. Good surveys are short. They should be less than 5 minutes. They should be multiple choice. If they are not short, if they are not multiple choice, set that expectation ahead of time. Say, hey, by the way, this is going to take 10 minutes. This is going to take 15 minutes. Make sure you set aside time to do this really well. But most surveys should be very short, because who here has looked at a survey that looked too long and you just said, I'm not going to do that? Anybody? Yeah, a lot of people. And if you do it, you might fly through and not give like real good information. Start broad and then get more detailed. Before you ask somebody, do you have AT&T for your cable? You should ask, do you have cable? Group related questions together. Instead of saying, do you have cable? Do you have bananas in your kitchen? Do you use AT&T for your cable? Keep those things together, you know? And before you send it out to a lot of people, send it out to a couple people first just to get eyes on it. And not people that you think are necessarily your users, but people you trust who go through this process too and can tell you, is this a biased survey? Is this a leading survey? Is this skewed? Am I going to get good data? Test it with people first. And the last point on good surveys, use rating scales. If you use a text box in a survey, it's going to lower your responses, and it's not going to give you good data. The only text box that I advocate for on surveys is if you're sending a 2-question NPS, Net Promoter Score survey. The first question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend or colleague? And the box says, why did you rate that? Even that should be optional. Give people an out. People don't want to put time and thought into that, and if you're asking them for time and thought, you should probably be doing user interviews instead. Bad surveys. This is kind of fun. What I mentioned earlier, the would you buy this? You're using that to justify assumptions. It's a leading question. Would you use this? Questions like, do you like salt and pepper on your eggs? That's a double-barreled question. Maybe I like salt, but I don't like pepper. Maybe I like pepper, but I don't like salt. But I do love 90s music. Don't ask double-barreled questions. And asking why, this is probably going to be an open text field question, and you're not going to get a very insightful response. Here's an example of a survey that I think is structured well. This is from an exit survey from Unreal Collective. How proud are you of the progress you made on your project? And it's a 0 to 10 scale. Not at all proud to extremely proud. Show them where neutral is. Makes it easy for them to fly through this, get it done quickly, and then you have a lot of quantitative data to actually go back and use. All these questions are kind of done in the same fashion. All right, now on to the interviews, the good stuff, the stuff I really want to share with you guys. Before you interview somebody, you should know if they are a good fit for your assumptions. If your assumption is that you're creating software for a doctor, you probably don't need to interview a lawyer, and you can screen them out beforehand, because it's not just non-useful, it's actually dangerous. If you're talking to somebody who's not your target user and you base decisions on their responses, then you're not making the right decisions with your products. You're not making the right decisions with the direction you're going, because you're getting the wrong information from the wrong person. So I recommend creating a screener before you pull someone in for an interview. And this is really simple. You think about, okay, who are the people that I actually want to talk to? Who are the people that I'm assuming are my users that I want to talk to? This is an example, again, with Nest, the smart home thermostat. People who've used thermostats are someone that I want to talk to. iPad users. This is kind of used as a indication of whether someone is minimally tech savvy. A range of ages from 18 to 60. We think that Nest can fit people from a wide spectrum. A mix of men and women. This is important that we have a mix. And mid-range of educational backgrounds. Don't want to be too highly educated because they were going mass market. And so, okay, if I've decided that I want to talk to iPad users, how can I determine what is the exact criteria that says someone is an iPad user? They have used an iPad at least 3 times in the last week is our determinant. And so how do I turn that requirement into a question that can screen someone in or out? In the past week, which devices have you used at least 3 times? And then add a bunch of different devices so they don't know that you're looking for iPad. So it creates honesty. It's also important in a screener to talk about who you specifically don't want to talk to. I don't want to talk to people who are already a user of Nest. I don't want to talk to people who are under the age of 18. I don't want to talk to people who are unusually technical. I don't want to talk to people who work in real estate or property management. And it's the same thing. How do you make criteria to say this person fits that description or not? And then how do you turn that into a question? And you don't want these questions to be written in such a way that you feel like it's obvious what the answer that you're looking for is, because response bias will have them try to answer correctly. They want to pass this thing. If you're a market research firm and you're sending Jay Klaus an email asking him to come do a study for you, and he's trying to game the survey because he knows he's going to get $300 for sitting there for an hour, he's going to try to get the right answers in your screener. So make that non-obvious. Sharing the screener. Okay, you've got the screener. How do I get this in front of people that I think are going to be the right people for me to interview? Put it together into a digital format. You can post it at Craigslist. You can share it at Facebook, on Facebook, or at Facebook. If you think people who work at Facebook are your target audience, you can share it at Facebook. You can go to conferences and events and kind of set up and say, hey, do you mind taking time for this survey? Depending on how many people you want, it's really not hard to get in front of people. Really, really not hard. Interview questions that are good. This is the fun stuff. Conducting the interview. Before you conduct the interview, get a plan together, put a template together is what I like to call it, a sheet that at the top says, okay, what are my objectives for this interview? What am I trying to learn? I'm trying to learn what this person's problems are. I'm trying to learn what their top 3 issues in their day is. I'm trying to learn what demographics the person of this user type typically fall into. Let's say that the user, again, was office managers. What are the demographics of a lot of these people? What are the psychographics? What do they think about the world? How do they see the world? Then have a little bit of an intro in that template, too, to say, hi, hello, welcome to the interview. We're happy that you're here. I'm just going to ask you a few short questions. I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be comfortable. If at any time you need to stand up and use the restroom, by all means, if you need a water, let me know. We'll pause. That's fine. If you have to take a phone call, just let me know. Create a safe space. Start building this rapport, make it comfortable, and then get into listing out the questions that you really want to hit on. Look at those learning objectives and say, okay, if I want to know their demographics, if I want to know how long they hold this role, what questions can I ask? So you can ask things like age, who is your employer, how long have you been there, what is your title with that employer? If you're trying to figure out, does this person have the need that I'm hypothesizing, ask questions like, what are the top 3 problems you face in your day-to-day? And before I drill into their work specifically, I like to leave it vague and just say, what are your top 3 problems that you face on a day-to-day? Because if they are going to something, let's say you think you're solving a problem for their work life, if they immediately go to something that is work-related and that's one of their top 3 problems, you're really onto something. If they don't touch on that and they touch on all things with home or their personal life, fine. You can ask a second question of, let's talk about your role here. What are your top 3 problems that you face on a daily basis? And what I really like as a sort of shift to that question, some people are kind of closed and slow to warm up and they try to think really practically. If you say, let's say you have a magic wand. If you could wave a magic wand and get rid of 3 things about your workflow or change 3 things about your role, what would that be? And asking them that magic wand kind of gives them this creative license to think outside of what they think is possible, to think really deeply about what do I hate, even though I think that there's no way to change that. You're saying, forget any aspect of realism that you have. Let's give you a way out of that. When they tell you their problems, ask, what causes that? Okay, so you really hate when you add in the wrong last name from somebody's handwritten sheet. What causes that? Well, they were in a rush, or there's not a lot of time, or I couldn't read their handwriting. Okay, this is just data that you're trying to gather. Always ask them, can I follow up after the interview? It's a little bit out of order. But after the interview, you want to make sure that you ask, can I follow up with you? Because you're going to get a ton of data through this process, but you may not get it all. And there may be something that you say, I wish I would have asked more about that. And so asking explicit permission to follow up is going to engender you to them and also give you that permission to follow up. They're going to have a little bit of response bias to say, oh, I told this guy you could follow up if you have more questions. He has another question. Let me respond to him. I like asking specific parts of their day in terms of processes. What do you wish you could do today that you can't now? Again, you can throw the magic wand in here. If you had a magic wand, what do you wish you could do differently? How do you know that you've had a successful day or a successful month or a successful year? What are your measures of success? When they say something, you can always ask, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or can you say that again? Or can you give me an example? You just want to ask as much, you want to get as much information as you can, because, and this is why you don't ask this in surveys, people talk very freely and very comfortably, and they'll tell you a lot more information quickly in a personal interaction, and you'll hear so much that you weren't expecting. I can't even begin to count the number of times I went into an interview thinking I was going to know what they would say, and something totally different comes out. You start going down that rabbit hole of saying, okay, this is interesting. And once you've spotted the start of that pattern, when you talk to other interview candidates, they may mention something similar. And so you can try to lead them down that path too and see, are they having similar problems? Do they think about this similarly? Because what you're looking for in these interviews are patterns. Patterns that confirm your assumptions, invalidate your assumptions, or start changing your assumptions in some way. When you're conducting interviews, and this is just as important as the questions themselves, is how you as a person exist within that space and actually conduct that interview with the person. You actually kind of have to get into character to do this well. You have to go into interview mode, and that means checking your emotions and assumptions at the door. You're there to learn. You are not there to pitch. You are not there to dispute the way they think about things. Everything they have to say is valid and really valuable to you. So always ask for more information. Don't try to change their way of thinking, because if you start trying to explain yourself or pitch them on something, they're going to close up. They're going to get the feeling that you want them to say something specific, and they're going to think, oh, I don't know if I have the right answer. I'm going to talk less. And you want them to talk a lot. You want them to talk more. And so to do that, smile, be interested in them. I like to call the order of conversation kind of like an arc, like an emotional or intensity arc. You know, if you're trying to solve a problem in their workplace and you're asking them to speak poorly about their workplace, or in their mind they think they're going to speak poorly about their workplace, don't start the conversation there. Start somewhere simpler. Start asking about their age and their title and what their days are like, and maybe even how long they've lived in this city. Start kind of slow, build up a relationship and get them speaking. And then as you go down the path and saying, okay, so what are your top 3 problems on a day-to-day basis? What causes that? Why do you think your boss thinks like that? You know, they'll be more comfortable and they'll just kind of share a lot more with you. And then just like you ramp up to that, you then ramp down. You start asking easier things, the things like, can I follow up with you? Do you have any plans this weekend? Not in like a weird way, but like, you know, just to build rapport. And again, at any point, if you're in doubt, clarify. Say things like, can you tell me that again? Can you say that in another way? And as they're speaking, you know, you want to be making eye contact. You don't want to be on your phone. If it's possible to record audio or video for this interview, so you're not just scribbling notes and looking down at your paper and you can maintain eye contact, you know, you want to be sort of on the edge of your chair and just like nodding and saying, That like really encourages people to continue down that path and to keep speaking, and that's really good. And again, do not pitch your idea. At this phase of customer discovery, you shouldn't even really feel like you know what your product is going to be. You need to really understand their problems, and there's no place for pitching there. You want to shut up and listen, and you want to watch everything about them, the way that they're smiling or interacting. If they're closed, if they're like crossing their arms, they're not comfortable, and you should scale back the intensity arch. If they're angled away from you, they're not comfortable. If they're avoiding eye contact, they're not comfortable. Bring it back. Start building this personal connection again so you can start getting good information again. And you listen through that whole process. So now you've interviewed 20 people. 20 people that you think are your target users. You have all this anecdotal evidence that you've kind of taken into notes. You've got notebooks full, or you've got audio files and video files and transcriptions. And you're saying, how the heck do I analyze this? This is not quantitative. And again, you're looking for patterns. If there's something that you kept hearing over and over again, and ideally, it's validating your assumptions. If you think that homeowners, in the Nest example, wanted to save time and money, and you're asking them about their problems, and all other things tie back to, I just don't have enough time, or I'm overspending, my budget is too low, I wish there was more money I could save somehow. You're validating those assumptions, and if you keep hearing that across people, that's really good news, because when you're starting down the path of selling a product, it's kind of this staged process of how good the opportunity is. Because for you to sell to somebody, they need to first be aware that this is a problem for them. Even if you're solving a problem or creating value for them, if they're not aware that's something they need, doesn't mean they won't buy it, but it does mean it could be drastically more expensive to get them to buy something, because you have to first create awareness and you have to first educate them on this opportunity. So in these interviews, if they are identifying, self-identifying the problem that you think you're solving, really good thing. And then they go down the line of, okay, have you, let's say they identified the problem, they said, I want to save time and money. You ask, what have you been doing to solve that problem? And if they say nothing, then that's another stage they haven't quite crossed yet. But if they're saying, here are the 3 things I've checked and the 3 things I'm trying to do this, that means that, again, they feel that problem much more painfully, and it's going to be a much easier sell. It's going to be much cheaper to acquire that customer. So the more that they are aware of and already looking for alternatives or looking for solutions, that's a really good sign. If they have tried solutions and they're unhappy with them, that's the 3rd stage, also a really good sign. You just know that you have to create a solution that they're happy with that's better than those existing solutions. They are already feeling the problem, they're aware of the problem, they're looking for solutions, they want to solve it so badly, they're trying products and they're not happy, big in. And the 4th stage is if they have a budget already set aside, and this is usually more in the B2B space, but if they have a budget set aside to solve this problem when the right solution comes around, like, good times. But a lot of times you have people, 42% of the time, you're solving something that there's no consumer need. They aren't even at stage 1. You got to get past stage 1 or you're going to be spending like crazy to acquire these customers. So you're looking for patterns. After the interview, summarize what you found. Summarize those patterns. Summarize, okay, I had these assumptions. What did I learn? Was I on base? Was I off base? Did they say something that starts a new assumption? What did I learn about my hypothesis? Does that change my hypothesis? Does it further help me define who my user is? Maybe I know now, instead of just saying, I think my user is 24 to 32-year-old women, it's not 24 to 32-year-old women. It's anybody who feels this way about this problem. And that's moving from demographics to psychographics. That's looking at how do you see the world? How do you consider your place in the world and the things you put value in and the way that you manifest in this planet? And there are 3 outcomes to this. You either, 1, say, that really validated my assumptions. I was right. That's amazing. Woohoo. You celebrate, and you move on to stage 2 of customer development, which is customer validation. You say, okay, I figured out that there's a real need this person feels. They are really looking for solutions to it. Now I'm going to create an MVP, and I'm going to try to get them to pay me money for that solution. That's stage 2, actually asking for money for an actual solution. The other outcome is you can think, well, I'm close. You're not totally sold on the fact that the problem they're talking about is the problem you're assuming. You're not totally sure that the idea you were thinking about that could solve that problem will solve the problem they're talking about, in which case I would recommend shifting your hypothesis a little bit and doing a new wave of interviews and making sure that you really, really understand them before you spend any more time and money going down this path of creating something. And the third is you're just wrong and you were way off, and so you got to start all over or drop the thing completely. And a lot of people look at this as a problem and they say, shit, I'm wrong, and they have like their identity wrapped into this, and they're saying, man, I can't give this up because I've talked too much about it, and I can't just drop this. But you should look at this failure as like a real success, because this is saving you a lot of pain. This is saving you a lot of pain and a lot of loss early on. And if you can save that pain and loss before you actually spend more time and more money and build a real thing, that's amazing. That's like super good for you. So then, like I said, if you move on from customer discovery, you go to customer validation, where you test whether people will pay you and if there's a real business model behind that. Real life example here, I mentioned cross-checks earlier. When we were talking to office managers, this is my first 5 weeks on the job at cross-checks. They said, hey, we've got ideas. They were assumptions. They basically had problem hypotheses. And they said, we don't know which one of these we should actually pursue, We want you to figure that out. And this was in June of 2016. I got in a full suit in my car in the heat of Ohio summer, and I was traveling to 20 offices a day. I was going on the yellow pages, I was scraping them, I was bringing in addresses, I was putting them in some free tool that was super gnarly but would optimize a route for me, and I was going around and visiting 20 offices a day, literally knocking on the door, going in, knowing I wanted to talk to an office manager, but I first had to get through the front desk person. And then, if the office manager said yes, and I actually got to talk to her, she usually had to get sign-off from the doctor, who might have been even like her husband or his wife, or, you know, a lot of times these small offices were really connected. But this is like really what you have to do in this stage. You have to go talk to people. We were knocking on doors because these guys are so inundated with requests for their time, and they're so crazy busy at their offices. They don't answer the phones. They don't answer emails, especially not cold emails from someone that may be trying to sell them something. We had to go and we had to build rapport and we had to talk to our users and say, hey, I'm not here to sell you something, I'm really here to learn. And then they would invite us in. But we would go then, I built a Google form that had these problem hypotheses on it with a 1 to 5 scale of whether or not that conversation indicated that our assumptions were correct. And after every conversation, we would just rate all those problem hypotheses. And it would go into a Google spreadsheet, and then I'd pull down the data and say, which one of these are we finding is a real problem from these literally hundreds of conversations we're having, because I had a 3 or 4 person team at one point. And that was how we decided to go with this product for office managers and this electric check-in process for independent physician offices. One more real-life example that I really, really like that just speaks to the power of interviewing your customers. Spotify, which I'm sure we've all aware of. I'm going to save you the work of raising your hand to say you're aware of Spotify. They have Discover Weekly, this awesome thing that came out a couple years ago that people were really excited about. The original vision of Discover Weekly was that it was giving you a curated list of songs that you had never heard any of them before. It was saying, we know your music profile so well that we're going to give you a complete list of new songs, completely new to you, so that you can discover new artists. And they released it, and it had a bunch of positive feedback. People loved it. They're like, oh man, this is great. And they realized at Spotify there was a bug in the code, and they realized that they were giving people songs that they had already listened to on Spotify. And they're saying, oh, that's wrong. We want to give them all new songs. So they took that out. They fixed that, and they patched it. And engagement went way down. And they said, why did that happen? And so they went and they talked to a bunch of their users, and what they found out was those users were identifying that because their Discover Weekly was giving them music that they had already listened to and they knew they liked, they read that as Spotify really knows me. And so they put that back together so that your Discover Weekly brings you like some songs that you've already listened to on Spotify, just to like build credibility and build some brand affinity, some trust. So, okay, you validated this. How do you find users? There's really no magic pill or silver bullet for this. It's just hard work. You have to figure out who your users are, really understand where they are or who they are, and then meet them where they already hang out. Go to places like, okay, if my target users are office managers, I can go to their office. I can go to conventions where office managers get together. I can create an event where office managers are coming. It's finding out where those people are already hanging out and going there to get in front of them, because that environment is usually somewhere they're more comfortable and they feel safer and they're more willing to engage with you. And so that's the best way to do it. All right, that's all I got. Happy to answer some questions.